He's backed all of our lawsuits. Kennedy is the founder of Children's Health Defense, which sponsored this lawsuit against the city of New York. The Children's Health Defense says part of its mission is to advocate for worldwide rights to health freedom and bodily autonomy. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Students are cheating with ChatGPT. In one student's essay, a teacher found the text, "I am just an AI language model. I don't have an opinion on that." Teachers are trying to come up with ways to AI-proof their courses, but there may not be a way. NTD's Fake Quarter has more. Advisor and now senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, Dr. Scott Atlas, for his analysis. Dr. Atlas, thanks for joining us. The WHO says ARIS should be more closely watched than other COVID variants. The name itself belongs to a goddess of strife. How worried should we be?
Well, I don't think we should be as worried as some people are saying, because this is the actual expectation from a virus that is now endemic. Endemic means it will be here forever, essentially, just like 4 or 5 other coronaviruses are. This is the expected outcome endemic, where we see variants persist that are still contagious, but they are far less lethal, and there is no evidence that this variant is increasing the amount of serious or hospital-requiring infections or deaths. This is exactly what we should expect. There is no reason to be afraid, and I'm actually a little afraid at the constant fear about COVID.
And for those who want to seek alternate treatment for COVID, the FDA now says that doctors can prescribe ivermectin. How do you see this apparent about-face?
Well, I think this is revealing a problem, how the FDA, instead of persuading people with facts, they, including other public health leaders, tried to persuade people by distorting the information or preventing a reasonable information from getting to the public. Ivermectin is one such story, where the FDA was really flagrantly violating the public good and really ethics by tweeting out things like ivermectin, if you're not a horse, you're not a cow, stop using ivermectin. This was really an FDA-approved drug. Ivermectin, just like hydroxychloroquine, are safe and effective drugs that have been FDA-approved and have been used in really billions of doses, yet the public was dissuaded from using them. This was really one of the first times, if not the first time in history, that doctors were not just blackballed for using it, but prescriptions were not being filled by pharmacists for drugs to be safe. Both of these drugs, like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, had a what's called mechanism of action that would indicate that they might work. There was differences in clinical data on using these drugs, yet the FDA was really harming the public and dissuading people from using drugs that could have worked, particularly when there was nothing else that was working. So now they're backtracking. The FDA is saying, we never said you couldn't use the drug. But when you really inform the public in a way that makes them afraid of using a drug, they didn't just stop the use of the drug, they stopped the use of the drug in adequate clinical trials that might have shown efficacy and saved lives.
Dr. Scott Atlas, senior fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution and former
There you
advisor
go,
to the White House
YouTube.
Coronavirus Task Force.
I'm going to shove this one right up your butt.
The government never funded this gain-of-function research. We now have the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, has admitted that the funding came from the NIH. We have the acting director, Tabak, of the NIH, admitting it in writing that it came from the NIH. But now we have really the smoking gun, and that is Fauci in private saying the opposite of what he was saying in public. When he was publicly telling me that absolutely we did not fund gain-of-function research in China, he says privately, we are suspicious that the virus has been manipulated, and we are suspicious because we know they are doing gain-of-function research. He then goes on to describe the research, and it's exactly the research that the NIH funded. So he's caught dead to rights here.
Senator Paul has contacted the local U.S. attorney in D.C., and because Attorney General Merrick Garland is refusing to do anything about this alleged case of perjury. And similarly to the risks posed by the Wuhan lab, a secret biotech lab in California last month has also been discovered. Within that California lab was a significant amount of biological material, including unmarked blood samples, illegal COVID and pregnancy tests, human tissue, other bodily fluid samples, in addition to over 800 different chemicals that are being marked as unknown. That lab was owned by Prestige Biotech, which was registered in Las Vegas and has addresses connected to it that are either empty offices or they are located in China. Most chilling of all, 20 potentially infectious agents were found on site. Now, all this leads us to a lot of questions, but I'd say chief among those is, why does the scientific community continue to have these connections to communist China and dangerous experimental research? To discuss this with us today, we have Hans Monk, co-host of Truth Over News. Hey, Hans, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, first off, regarding Dr. Fauci's seemingly blatant perjury, do you foresee any kind of consequences coming his way? I mean, do you think Senator Paul will be able to go after, really get anyone to actually go after Fauci? I mean, he did say there's partisans everywhere in the justice system, which might make it a little difficult to do that.
Well, he's right. I mean, he referred Fauci to the DOJ and nothing happened. And then more recently, he referred Fauci to the U.S. attorney down in D.C. That's the same guy who dismissed who didn't want to pursue the Hunter charges. So nothing's going to happen there either. I think the only path, if we weren't going to wait for 2025, in case there's a new Republican president, who knows, other than that, focus on the states. I mean, you've reported about the free speech case brought by Missouri and Louisiana. That's like the template. That's perfect. You got state attorneys general. Use those guys. Find a bunch of good ones and pursue Fauci through those people. Because Fauci's lies didn't only affect people in D.C. They affected people across the whole country. So there's certainly grounds for pursuing him through that way.
Interesting. Well, and the labs are becoming a bigger focus too, not just in China, but I mean, even in Ukraine and elsewhere. People are wondering, what are these labs? What are they actually working on? And are these a threat? Then suddenly they find this secret, unregistered laboratory in California. I mean, do you see this just being more of the same negligence as Wuhan, or is it something else? I mean, is something like this even more of a risk, being completely unknown to the citizens of the community it was in? And could there be more labs like that around the country as well? What's your take?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I think this goes back to the point I just made, that this has become very accessible, very easy to do. And I don't think we have enough details about the lab out in Fresno it's an extremely shady story. I mean, we can say that for sure. There's these connections to China. It was housed in a warehouse. No one had a clue it was there. It was just found because of some city inspector who kind of just was checking on the commercial properties over there. It was just kind of luck that it was found, right? And they had humanized mice, or supposedly. Humanized mice is what supposedly the Wuhan lab also used to make what we just talked about earlier, making these viruses adapted to humans, so that they can get past those. So the humanized mice, they basically mimic humans. So you pass the virus through these mice over and over, and then they become accustomed to infecting the mice, which they have lungs that mimic humans. So then when it escapes, it affects humans. So what were those guys doing with humanized mice out there in Fresno in that lab? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't sound good. And I think you're right. The fact that this buildings inspector or city inspector or whatever happened to stumble upon this kind of tells you this is probably just a needle in the haystack, and there's probably other needles elsewhere that we have no idea. I don't know what they were doing. I think we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that story.
Hans, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
In other news, there's a dark side to the fertility industry, and China may be involved in using American mothers as surrogates for designer children. Stay tuned.